The expressed views, statements, and opinions by the guests on the Risk Advisor program made either during the show or on the corresponding social media and blog outlets are not necessarily the view or opinions of Baxter Productions, Inc. or any of its affiliates, associates, or others who are part of this production. Information provided during this broadcast is for news purposes only and does not constitute a remedy for any of the discussed risks presented.
Do you enjoy watching movies about covert spies and the toys that they play with? Did you ever wish you had some of the toys? Well, that you could do what they do when they try and listen and bug conversations? Well, guess what? You're much closer than you might think. We're going to find out today on theriskadvisor.com.
The Risk Advisor. You're listening to the Risk Advisor podcast. The Risk Advisor highlights topics about the most important personal security and safety issues today. You can be more aware and more informed to stay safe in this ever-changing, complicated place we call life. And now your host, media's go-to guy, Sal Lifrieri.
Welcome to the riskadvisor.com vodcast. We're here with Charles Patterson, the president of Exec Security TSCM, talking about how spies bug their victims and what people need to do to not become a victim. Welcome back, Charles.
Thank you, Sal.
Good to have you. So when we last spoke, we were talking about bugging devices, some of the countermeasures, some of that stuff. For those that missed the first show, let's talk about bugging, spying. Is it real? What are the devices looking like?
Devices these days, technology has allowed them to be made quite small and inexpensive. A lot of devices are readily available online that people may not realize. There's
I think we got some samples that we
that's a little
have.
Transmitter that can transmit quite a long distance and send audio, clear audio, to be recorded or listened to.
And it's easy to hide.
Something like that is so small, a little bit of double stick tape and put it under a conference table or under a chair, and it's good to go. Another example, this is something actually that looks like a regular desk calculator, but inside it has a cellular transmitter that can be dialed into remotely to listen in to anything going on in the room.
And the problem with that is, well, the risk with that is that you could be anywhere in the world to dial in.
Right.
And dial. Where does that get the power from, though? From the calculator itself?
That one has a battery that needs charging. So one of the challenges with devices is they all need power. So it could be a clue to look for. If in this particular calculator, there is a battery just for the calculator itself, but further inside there's a hole for a charger. So sometimes you might find a device that normally doesn't need power, whether it's a telephone or something like that. Then it has a plug going to the wall outlet. That could be a sign that there's something peculiar going on.
Here's a device that I actually had worn. This is a standard watch, right? It shows up as a standard watch, but has video and audio capability, recording capability, so that you can wear this going into a meeting, or if you're having a need for a particular recording for both video and audio, that this would give you that opportunity.
Right.
Where are these available? We love to think that this stuff comes from, the NSA or government, but in reality, where can the average person find this stuff?
Most of this stuff is available at spy shops and online in various places. Something like that is very, very difficult. If someone's wearing it, it's not necessarily transmitting, it's recording. If someone's having serious conferences or meetings in their place of business or something like that, a lot of companies now will take steps to say no cell phones allowed. Any watches have to be inspected. If someone has an Apple Watch or some other computerized watch, they may not be allowed into the meeting. People have to leave everything outside. Some meetings, people actually go through metal detectors before they're allowed in, just to make sure that there's nothing nefarious like that going on.
And I remember from the law enforcement side, in the world of which I came from, if there were certain meetings that you were going to have, you would have them in what was known as SCIFs.
The SCIF, right.
Right, which was a room that you would go into that even if you had a device on you, unless you were recording, nothing was going to be transmitted out.
Right.
So you had the skiffs that you had to contend with. So how does somebody get into this? How do you wind up doing this? Was this something as a kid you were a tinkerer?
Well, technology has always been fascinating for me. All types of things. I was still am a ham radio licensed ham radio operator, but I got into that when I was 12. My cousin and I challenged each other as to see who could get their license first, and we were tinkering, pulling apart our parents'.
Wait, that's back in the day when you needed Morse code.
Oh, yes, you did. Yes, you did. That was a challenge, but got that down. But the technology was a lot of fun, and I continue to work with technology in a lot of different ways. In my security career, which I started in the security world in 1978, worked with two-way radios, closed-circuit cameras. The first camera I installed was in a housing about this big. It was a black and white camera, cost about $10,000. That was one camera on a large facility. Now, of course, prices have dropped a little. And
just a little.
Yeah, they're available everywhere. But the technical aspect is important, but along with understanding all the technical side, whether it's audio, video, radio signals, you also have to understand security. That's where a lot of people may fall short. It's important to have a level head about security concerns. Why you need security, why it's important, what are you trying to protect? It's one of the things we have to figure out all the time working with our clients. What is the concern? What is really at stake?
By the time they get to you, though, the client is basically saying, okay, look, I have a problem. I recognize I have a problem. I have a need. Something's wrong, and we need to chat with you. How do you get those people that don't realize that everything that they have or all of their information is valuable, where they just look and they kind of shrug their shoulders and go, who wants to listen to my conversation, or who wants my information?
Quite often, as is the case with all aspects of security, it's often after there's been an incident, that's when they realize they should have been.
So after the home is burglarized, they get the burglar alarm.
Exactly. After the president was shot, that's when the Secret Service started protecting the president for Abraham Lincoln. And that's been the case because it's hard to recognize the value until you lose something.
What are the quick things before we hit for a break? One of the quick things has always been corporate CEOs will have offices, the conference room swept, their offices, or key executives in the company will have a sweep. What about what happens at home?
Homes are often not that well protected. We may go into a large corporate office where they have multi-levels of security, badge access to all the floors. But when the executives go home, there may be no security. They just lock their door at night or maybe turn on an alarm system. That's often a much easier target, and they still have conversations at their home. One executive's home that we inspected, we found he had a traditional analog phone line, copper wires, that was the hotline to his company. So if he had important company information he needed to talk about, communications, that's the phone he would use. But it was the most vulnerable of all phones.
All he needed to do was take a megaphone outside and just broadcast it. We're going to take a quick break. When we get back, we're going to continue our conversation with Charles Patterson of Exec Security, TSCM, and we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the countermeasures and some of the things that you'll encounter when dealing in this realm. We'll be right back.
Workplace violence, terrorism, identity theft, cyberbullying, and stalking. It's not a matter of if they will happen, it's a matter of when. The security world is too complicated to do it alone. You need a security advisor. Call Protective Countermeasures now. Protective Countermeasures has been providing security consulting to Fortune 500 companies for nearly 20 years. Call today, 914-576-8706, protectivecountermeasures.com.
You are watching the Risk Advisor Vodcast, and we're back with Charles Patterson of Exec Security, TSCM, talking about eavesdropping and wiretapping risks that we face. So Charles, we talk about, and I guess we can get into a little technical perspective of it with regards to, rogue access points and Wi-Fi and cyber and the different, strategic things that happen. But it's probably a lot better for the audience to understand by example. So maybe we can talk about a few things like, a microphone in the ceiling is
Right.
something that becomes a risk.
Right.
Talk to us about maybe a practical example of what happened.
Yeah, as you mentioned, there's a lot of cyber concerns today, but cybersecurity doesn't cover all of the threats, all of the things that could happen. A rogue access point that you referred to, that's a Wi-Fi access point in an office, but maybe there's one that doesn't belong there. We were sweeping a high-tech company, and we know what their access points should look like because we can actually read the ID of the different access points, and then all of a sudden, here's one that has a weird label. It's actually labeled dark web, and we thought, this is peculiar. Why is this here? It wasn't in the area that we were sweeping, so we could have just sloughed it off and said, well, it's not our concern. But we knew that it didn't belong, and we were able to report it to security, and they were able to, with our help, track it down and find out that an employee had set up their own access point, which then put the whole corporate network at risk.
Which basically was a backdoor for him to be able to get in, not necessarily to do something nefarious, but to do something just to be able to be effective.
True. There may not have been anything malicious about it. I believe he claimed he just wanted to get better Wi-Fi in his cubicle or wherever it was. But from the point of view of the shareholders of the company, that's a big risk. Today, you'll hear in the news if say a cybersecurity company finds a vulnerability in somebody's network, that becomes huge news. It's like, well, how long has this threat been there? How long has this vulnerability been there? But it happens all the time in the non-cyber world, but you don't hear about it. It's usually covered over, rather quickly.
They don't want that to get out. They don't,
Right.
Especially when they're doing something stupid. We had a client once who, the technician who was supposed to be fixing problems that were happening, around, the guy that went in and fixed the phones or whatever, had put in a system so that if anybody was calling him, he was a wireless system. So if anybody called him, he'd be able to hear it over a headset and be able to respond quicker. And no nefarious intent at all, but the device that he was using to transmit that out winds up becoming a bug.
Correct. We've seen a lot of vulnerabilities in AV systems. One job, our technicians were sweeping a conference room, and they found a baby monitor, an old-style baby monitor, hidden underneath the conference table. They were alarmed at first, but it turned out it was put there by the AV team because they wanted to be able to know the next segment of a meeting, what was going on, so they could produce the right, PowerPoint screens or whatever they were doing. Another auditorium we went to for a large company, we had been there many times before, and of course, this is a major auditorium. It's got microphones built in all over the place. But for some reason, we're picking up an analog, non-encrypted signal that's broadcasting every microphone in the whole room. We traced it down and we discovered it was a defective piece of audio equipment that had just gone into oscillation and was broadcasting audio. Nothing nefarious about it. It apparently happened all on its own. We did analysis of the device. It wasn't anything, particularly malicious or bad about it. But that conference room was used for major senior management meetings and strategy meetings for this, international world-level company. So that's a major concern that needs to be, discovered and taken care of. And that's where regular proactive sweeps come in a very practical way. It's nothing cyber would have found that. Even the AV guys would never have noticed. Only by doing a proactive, regularly scheduled technical countermeasure sweep was something like that be found.
What's changed and why? What's popping up that wasn't there before? Let's talk about phone hacks for a bit. With telephones today, they're no longer the old Alexander Graham Bell type phone. They've gotten way more complicated in their computers.
Yeah, with the introduction of voicemail, a lot of information has become exposed or vulnerable. Quite often today, you'll hear about hacking of cell phones. Usually, it's the case where someone did not put a good password on their personal voicemail. But the same is true in businesses. Every business that has a voicemail system requires passwords. Most of them have remote access if you know the right password. Hacks of voicemail systems have been going on since they were first introduced. I started working on voicemail cases back in the 90s. Filipino hackers knew these systems. They learned the programming features of the system, dialed into the U.S., and tricked the phone system to call back to the Philippines to a toll number that just racked up cost. So the company would get the phone bill and says, well, you have $2,000 or $10,000 worth of phone calls to the Philippines. Like, what? We didn't do that. I got a call from a client one time. He said, I'm here on a Saturday. There's nobody in the office, but all my phone lines are lit up. What is going on? I said, first of all, go unplug your voicemail, and then I'll come over and we'll have to look at the software and figure it out. Those techniques can also be used to exfiltrate information. There's a feature in a lot of voicemail systems to forward a message to your cell phone. So if someone calls you and leaves a message and you're out, the message gets delivered to your cell phone, and nowadays by email as well. But if someone has the right access, this is not hacking in by computer either. It's just dialing the company, knowing the right touchtone to press. And you can trick the voicemail boxes to send those messages somewhere else, or even pass your own call through to another country.
Well, because the smartphones are just that, smartphones, you have the availability to get all of it, and that from someone who would hack the phone or would be trying to surreptitiously get into it. You have the availability of being able to. That's for me. That's an access point. So I don't have to worry about breaking through the front door and sneaking into a CEO's office. If I can get access to the phone or somebody's phone within their group, then I wind up getting access to it. And the real scary thing here is that you can actually go online and buy spyware on the internet that you can download on phones for, I think the last time I checked, it was like $149.
Or less, probably.
Yeah,
right.
The price just keeps dropping.
So, yeah, we try to advise people, hold on to your cell phone as if it's like a pacemaker. If it disappears, you're done. You could be in big trouble.
Yeah, it's true, and especially with the voicemails coming out now when you get the email that there's the voicemail and the voicemail's attached to it.
Right. Yeah.
And some of them make it even easier. They actually translate the voice into actual type so you can read it into text. So it makes life incredibly easy for you.
Right.
Anyway, we're going to stop and take a real quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about some steps to remain safe in this cyber world. We'll be right back.
From the files of New York detective Frank Santasola, a riveting murder mystery novel, The Garbage Murders. After an illicit liaison with his mistress, the owner of a private sanitation company in New York is murdered. Enter the life of Detective Frank Miranda, one of a few men in law enforcement to infiltrate the Italian mob and bring to justice some of the biggest names in organized crime history. On Amazon Books in paperback and Kindle editions.
TheGarbageMurders.com.
You're watching the Risk Advisor Vodcast. We're back with Charles Patterson, President of Exec Security, TSCM. So, Charles, we want to continue talking a little bit about the interrelationship between doing a bug sweep, a TSCM sweep, and cybersecurity. And so let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, cybersecurity is of course very, very important today. Cybersecurity is protecting the information that's on the network. It's also concerned about the communications of the network, but most of it is all contained within say, a corporate network or within your even your home network. But cybersecurity doesn't protect all communications. It doesn't protect all the information. There's a lot of areas that might fall out of the range of what might be covered typically by cybersecurity countermeasures or protective measures. One, as we mentioned recently, rogue access points. An access point could could be in an office that's not even part of the corporate network, but it could be there for maybe an innocent reason, but maybe it's not allowed to be there, or it could be there for some malicious reason. Because it's not technically part of the network, it may be missed by their normal
and a lot of
security checks.
A lot of times in my experience with these things is that they're not put in for malicious reasons, but they're put in and then they're forgotten about.
Right.
It's kind of like access control to a building, right? You give someone access control and then the person leaves and you never discount the card, right? You never stop the card from being used.
Right.
So you run into things like that, and that's why a good check is sort of important.
There could be other things that may be connected to a computer perhaps, but are not really a part of the network, so they may be totally missed by a lot of security checks. Here's an example of a USB cable that could be used for charging your phone, but hidden within the main plug is the circuit for a cellular phone. You put a SIM card in, and this can now be used, one, to track the location of the cable, but also to turn it on and activate a microphone to listen in. Also, microphones have been found, tiny microphones built into an Ethernet cable. So the Ethernet cable that's just left lying plugged into the wall, or perhaps even plugged into a computer or a laptop in an office, with a microphone on a spare pair of wires, because the network doesn't need all the wires that are in the cable. That spare wire could run back to a wiring closet where there it could be tapped off and run to either a transmitter or a recorder. These kinds of devices are there and need to be looked for because we know that these threats exist. But your typical network checks aren't going to see that. So this is not to discount the importance and the value of the cybersecurity, but there's other areas that may need to be protected.
I know one of the things that we were always concerned about in the construction of a command center, and we had building the SCIF, some of the requirements, audible sound was also really important, and you don't realize how sound travels.
Right. I was working in late at night in one office, and I knew I was alone, or I should be alone in the office, but then I hear a voice. I hear a couple of people talking. So I start to look through all the other rooms, and I don't hear it in the other rooms. I come back to the executive's office, and I'm hearing the voices again. When I look up in the ceiling, there's an air vent right above the desk, and the air vent is running down out of their office to another company's office where the cleaning crew was working. So I could hear the cleaning crew very well. I'm sure the cleaning crew could hear me at the same time. So that's an indication of discovering a problem that needs to be dealt with in one way or another. Similar thing happened. We were sweeping a large conference room, and as I moved into the corner, I started to hear voices. Now, I hope I'm not hearing them in my imagination. I actually heard some people talking and discovered that the air vent had a large gap leading into the room next door, which happened to be used as a coffee break room. So there was just a few people having a cup of coffee and chatting. But again, if I could hear them, they could hear me.
Hear you.
So that took rather simple steps to protect it. I reported it to the security director. The next time we were there, we found they had put a lot of insulation in, and the coffee pot had been moved a few rooms down.
We used to, one of the techniques we would use is we would put canvas breaks in it so that you wouldn't have one continuous sheet of metal going across. You didn't have the metal ducting. You'd have the canvas break, and that would prevent the sounds from going down, because you'd be able to take the old little piezo micro speakers, the little flat speakers, and you would take that and you could tape it onto a table, and then you just, if you connected that to a real small amplifier, a little pocket thing, if you went to the other end of the table and you just kind of rubbed your finger on the table, you could hear it crystal clear. So we would do the same. We took that same sort of approach, and decided to throw canvas breaks in, and that was part of a federal standard.
Right.
But a couple of minutes left. Talk us real quick about what goes into an actual sweep. What is the process when you show up with all of the equipment? You got your black bags. It's 2:00 in the morning, because none of this really happens in normal hours. what happens?
One of the first things we want to do is what we might think of as a quiet or non-invasive part of the sweep where we're focusing on radio signals. We might be also using thermal imaging, but we don't want to, if it's an active, if there's risk of someone actively eavesdropping on a room, we don't want to tip them off that we're there. So we'll be trying to look at things that won't raise too much concern. One thing we'll do is we usually turn on music or some other kind of sound so that one is that can stimulate a voice-activated microphone. So if there is a transmitter that requires sound to send off its signal, we'll be more likely to find it. And it'll also give us something, if we do happen to come across a signal, we'll recognize which room it is or that it's coming from our area. We go through a number of radio tests from the full spectrum analysis to cellular signals, Wi-Fi signals, Bluetooth, even decked telephones. We want to find out, are the signals where they belong? Are there any signals that are leaking improperly? Then we may move to thermal imaging, and then the nonlinear junction detector. We talked about it in a previous visit. Then we start also with the physical inspection. We'll be looking at telephone lines as well, but not just the phone set, but the outlets on the wall, the jacks. Is there any indication that a jack has been opened? We want to open it up. We'll take a look inside. There are devices available that look just like an outlet, but could have a camera, could have a transmitter, a Wi-Fi transmitter built inside. The physical inspection is the key element. If we find any indication that there's a problem, whether it's from a radio signal that seems out of place to maybe an outlet that's not sitting right, it all has to be checked out physically. So that's where a lot of the effort is. And a sweep of an office could take 1, 2, or 3 hours, depending on how large of a team we have, and maybe 2 people or 3 people is typical. So if we want to go through an entire floor of a building, for instance, it could take a lot of time.
I think in closing, I think one of the most important things here is that when we think about sweeps and we think about bugging devices, we think about government, we think about espionage, we think about the James Bond stuff. But in reality, people have a greater risk than they realize, and with the use of nanny cams and baby room monitors and that sort of stuff, they have an incredible risk that they just don't realize. And if it may not be a foreign government being interested in what you're saying, but at the embarrassment level that you can get in something like that today.
Right. If someone wants to hurt you or hurt your business, or just they want to know what you know, that's very easy for them to get some devices to make some trouble.
I mean, something as simple as baby room monitors, and you wind up or the nanny cams, and you wind up forgetting that they're in there, and then all of a sudden you have the throes of passion one night winds up on YouTube the next day.
That's also a problem.
It becomes a problem. Anyway. Charles, we want to thank you again for coming in and talking to us about this. This is something that I could just go on and on and on about. But I would like to remind you that if you have a question or a comment for Charles, please get to him. And you want to give us your email address and contact info again?
So our website is execsecurity.com, and my email is charles@execsecurity.com. The phone number is 800-337-2001.
That's good. If you happen to have any questions or you want to reach out to us as a result of the show, you could always reach us at the guest@theriskadvisor.com. We ask you to follow us on social media, follow our links to all of our social media sites associated with the show, and you can find that at theriskadvisor.com. Thanks again for watching, and we hope to see you next week. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this show. If you have any questions, would like to appear on the program, or recommend a guest, contact us at theriskadvisor.com. Stay safe and join us again next week for another episode of The Risk Advisor.